Hello everyone, my name is Nav. I'm from Montreal, GDG organizer at Group GDG organizer at GDG Montreal, Google developer expert for Android, working as a mobile software engineer at Manulife. So in this talk, we will cover the concept of SDK extensions, which is, I guess, introduced a couple of days ago. And if you are familiar with the tool which is introduced with Android 13 called PhotoPicker. It is basically related to that. But we are not just covering the PhotoPicker, but we will also go through before actually deep diving into the SDK extensions, like how it helps to backport the PhotoPicker. We will go through some of the history or some of the foundations that helps to actually backport some of the functionalities to the um, already released APIs, for example, 12, 11, or even maybe when we get the 14, it will be 13 also there. So let's get started with this. So if you are not familiar with what is Project Treble, I have added the links to the references. You can check that. But this is basically where it all started, like how how these things are later on helps to actually achieve the concept of updating some of the components using the play services. So this is the first project which is introduced by Google or by the Android team, which is called Project Treble. So if you see in this image, this is basically the Android's OS full release cycle. Like when Android team released the first, let's say Android 13 or whichever version, then it goes to the silicon manufacturers. They customize and do whatever they according to their requirements. They do their stuff, and then there is a board spot packages which are then goes to the device makers, for example Samsung, and then many other manufacturers are there. So this release cycle is basically like a step by step, and we cannot skip, or manufacturers they cannot skip there's like a heavily dependent on each other, and it takes a lot of time actually to ship the new version to the customers. For example, in case of Samsung, if you see like a quite a long delays when it comes to actually get the release to the Samsung devices as compared to the Pixel devices. So so this one. So before Project Treble, how actually Android releases work. So everything is like it's all together. Like the vendor implementation is also included with the OS release, like with the framework. There is like tight coupling, you can say. So they go all together, and then at the end, if manufacturers they want to update to the new OS version, they reworked on their vendor implementation to make sure that everything works. And then how it goes, like this is basically the small like a small representation of the previous pictures, like how the full release cycle works. And that is because of this vendor implementation is quite tightly coupled with the OS framework itself. So what actually Project Treble is helps to achieve is to like separating the vendor implementation from the core OS framework. So now Android team can push the changes like to the OS version, and vendor implementation is already separated. So they can automatically update the OS components or the OS itself, and the vendor implementation just keep like the old vendor implementation still stays there, and the release cycle will be much faster than the existing one. If you see in the before Drabble diagram, it's like integrated, like it's all together, but now it's like separated, which helps actually to achieve the things like backporting for a picker, or like if you see now also there is a Google Code Scanner API is also there, which is also available via Play services. So this the concept is basically called modular system components. So it's like not like it's basically like updating some of the components, or like the system is divided into sub modules rather than like a one giant module, which is like before Project Travel. But now there is like it helps to modularize the components, like there's sub components that can be separately, like they can be updated independently from other components. And it This is the basically this is kind of an enabler for the for achieving the SDK extensions functionality. So this is basically the architecture. This is again pretty much the same look like the project Treble one, but this is here how it basically looks like when it comes to understand how modular system components works in case of Android after project Treble and the project Mainline, which is also on top of project Treble. So Android OS framework is like it contains all the modules. So like in case of this one, like a PhotoPicker and then are other components that can be updated without any issues because now vendor implementation is already separated and then there are system apps are already there separate in the separate modules. So this is basically how this project helps to achieve updating system components without any like without full release cycle or without depending on the manufacturers to get the update and then they change their code to make sure that it's compatible, it works. So they can be updated separately rather than just like waiting for full release cycle for the next major release. And this is basically the screenshot, or I can say like the diagram, like which represents the project mainline, which updates the which uses the Google Play infrastructure to update the modules. So in our case, that we are going to see the SDK extensions. So this is basically how the Google Play infrastructure helps to achieve this functionality to update and backport some of the features that are not existed in the already released APIs and introduced in the new APIs or the latest Android versions. And also, if you can see, it's basically like a same. You are just updating your application. It's like when we update the applications, like from Play Store, but now it's also like helps to update the modules or deliver the modules over the air, which is like really helpful to provide a functionality or backport the functionality to older versions. So there are various like there is a long list of available modules that we can use or that can be backported or works. For example, ad services is there, then there is a ext services, then there is a SDK extensions, then there is a app search, which is like when you want to contribute to the system level app search. So if you want to check the full list that you can, the link is in the slides, you can check there. So in this one, we will just go through the how SDK extensions helps to actually implement PhotoPicker API for older versions than Android 13. Okay, so there are basically two file formats for the extensions or for the modules. They are using the format called Apex, and this is the diagram from the documentation. It's basically it's the fundamental difference between APK and the Apex is it's like it's loaded much earlier during the boarding process. So it as a result it helps to like deliver the updates faster than using the APK versions instead, which is like using for our Android applications. And it also like brings the performance improvements also because you don't need to update like your full OS version to get specific updates like security updates or patches or stuff like that. They can just be like delivered separate like module by module. So for the SDK extensions, there are three major components. The first one is like the drive class path. It sets the environment variables for the class extensions. And then the second one is like drive SDK. It's setting the system properties related to the SDK extensions. And the third one is the extensions. basically the API which exposes the functionality to the apps, like when we are using actually SDK extensions as a developers, like when we are interacting with the SDK extensions. So now we will basically go through some of the implementation concepts, like how we're going to use these SDK extensions. And the first concept I would say to cover, we're going to cover is API versioning. So there are now two options actually. So first we can check just like the new APIs, like we say like build or version code, like the SDK version code, which is like API 13, 14, 12, whatever. And then there is a SDK extensions version is also tied to the specific APIs. For example, SDK extensions version is tied to the Android 11, then 12, then 13. So you will see like something like this, like you are, it's basically building like the version codes, but also it shows you the extension version attached to that specific API. And then there is another way, like some of the extensions like the SDK extensions, they also exposes the some APIs where we can just consume those APIs to check the version. For example, in case of ad services, we can just use the SDK extensions ad services, and we can get the specific version checking done using these methods exposed by the API. So in this case, like in the case of the photo picker, which is basically based on the intent action, which is action pick images. So when you see, like when you go to the documentation, you will see in the documentation, if you see here in the screenshot, I have marked like a rectangle or around the documentation, which says it's added in API level 33, which is like Android 13. But in the next line it says also available in extensions too. So as I mentioned, like for the API versioning, we have the API versions, and then they are tied to the extensions if there is any available for that version. So this concept is basically started with Android 11 specifically for SDK extensions. So when you want to use pick images action, you can, like you can see now, it's although it's available starting with Android 13, but it's also backported to extensions version 2 with Android 11. So what that means is, like if you are building your application, you can use, there are like, in the next slides we will cover how we're going to make sure that we are using this API also on the previous versions, not just on 13, which is like really helpful for the developers. Because if it's just for Android 13, then if we see the market graphs, there are still a lot of old versions that are still used by many of the devices, or many users are still on older devices or older API versions than 33. So they, with extensions, helps actually to motivate developers to implement APIs that are also backported, and there is a no lot of if else in the, basically in the code base, where you check the API version, then you launch your pick image action, and if it's lower than 33, you are opening some sort of like maybe like a system document picker, or like your custom implementation for a photo picker or like the video picker. So now we will go through some of the details of how we can use the photo picker using the SDK extensions for Android, older versions of Android. So the first thing is, like you need to compile against SDK 33 or extensions level R2, which is we checked in the last slide. It's available in two different places. So when I say or, then it means like it's additive. So if you're compiling against the extension levels, that is, it's also available in 33, but it's not gonna be like a vice versa. If you are just compiling against SDK 33, then you are missing the opportunity to actually using this API for older versions. So first step is to like installing the SDK tools. I will show you later in the Android Studio to check like which extension versions are available or which we need in case based on the documentation or for the API requirements. In our case, it is R2. The next step is updating the build.gradle file. So we will add compile SDK version and then the compile SDK extensions. So here instead of R2, I defined as the extension versions 4, which is like the latest when I actually build the sample project for the demo purposes for this talk. But it can be, I think it's right now it's 5. So you can just update accordingly as whatever based on your requirements. So there are a couple of options actually to checking the availability of the SDK extensions version. So the first one is like checking at runtime. So this is the sample code which says like SDK extensions. There is a method called get extension versions. So here, because for the photo picker, we need a version RV2, like R2. So I'm checking like if there is a SDK extensions version R is greater than 2 available, then I can say like the photo picker is available, otherwise it's not available. And the second is like checking on the real device. So we can use the adb command to check like which version of SDK extensions is available on device. So this is the command, and I will show you in later in the core, like in the Android Studio, how the output looks like when we run this command, and it's easy to figure out like if if that device is having that extensions versions available that we need or not, and then we can use it accordingly for our testing purposes. So there is also if you know as Android developer, we got like activity contracts, like the result contracts. Instead of using on activity result, we have like a predefined contracts. So this is the one of the method from PhotoPicker contracts that we have available since API at 1.7. I'm not sure. So this is the method that you just need to call from your code to check the availability of PhotoPicker, and you don't need to, like, it will take away a lot of the boilerplate code for checking the SDK version, for checking the extension versions, and checking the photo picker availability of the picker via Google Play services. So I will show you the code in the Android Studio for this method, which checks like it has three different checks. So first one is like API check. So if it's 33, it's fine. Then if it's not the API 33, it's checking like the extension versions. Then if the picker is available via Google Play services. So if you check the latest documentation about the photo picker implementation, that's why it says like it works almost all the devices all the way back to API 19. So Android 11 to 13, it is like a photo picker, like all the way to the latest, whichever is coming or whatever. And then from Android 11 to I guess 21 or 23, it's like a photo picker. I think it's for the older versions, it's a picker provided by the Play services. So we just need to use like a one single implementation, and we are done with the providing functionality of selecting photos or videos in our application. So this is the code that I just checked earlier today. Like if we want to check the availability of the backordered version of the photo picker via Play services, so we need to add this code into our manifest file, and if it's that module is not available, it will be installed, and you are good to go from there. So next, these are all like the overall quick highlights of the SDK extensions. Now I can actually show you the code, and we will see what are the different methods, different available, like the available, how we're gonna check the availability of the SDK extensions, how we can use the photo picker result contracts, and some other stuff. So I will quickly increase the font size. Okay, so this is basically the old way of doing, like when we are launching the intent and then we are consuming the result on an activity result. But I'm using here, I will demo the photo picker, like the activity result contracts, which are predefined available for us and help us to implement the photo picker functionality in our applications. So this is just a sample of how we're gonna use it in if we want to use it in all the way. So this is basically the composable which is responsible for launching the activity result contract. So if you are familiar with the remember how we're gonna use those so that it will be remembered during the recompositions. So we have like a built-in function which is remember launcher for activity result. So I'm using that one here, and the built-in contract which is available for us is called pick visual media. And there is another version of it, which is if you see the line commented above here, line number 80, which is says pick multiple visual media. So if you want to allow your users to select more than one images or videos for your app, like with the photo picker, you can use that one, and it takes the parameter for how many images or videos you want that user can select. By default, it it is using the get image max limit. So if I can quickly show you that one actually. So if you see here in the implementation, the max items default to the get max items, and it depends on the media stores method, which is get pick image max limit, that need to be respected when we want to provide the number to this contract. So if you are not providing any, it will use this one. Otherwise, you can provide if you want to restrict it to one or two or whatever. I will again comment that line. So in this case, I'm using the pick visual media, which is like for single file, and this contract it gives back the URI. So here I'm using that URI for this mutable states because I'm consuming it later on to show that image in my composable function. So if that URI is not null, I'm just setting the result. Otherwise, just no media selected. I just simply say that. So where I'm actually using that is where I'm using that launching that contract, it is on this open photo picker. So it takes parameter called open launcher. So here I'm using the method that I shown earlier you in the slides. So it says like is photo picker available, and here is the magic which happen, which like take away all the boilerplate code for checking the API, like the API version, extensions, and play services. So it basically check three different calling three different functions. The first one is system picker available, which is like photo picker. Then there is system fallback picker available. This is for there is an intent action called, if you see here, action system fallback pick images. It can be implemented by the third party, like for example by Samsung or by other manufacturers. This is basically for the system apps, like we cannot use that one as like a for our normal applications. So if the photo picker is not available, they can use this action to provide their own photo picker. So they are checking that one here, and then they are checking if the picker is available via play services. So here actually they are checking for like, otherwise we need to write this code by ourselves. Like we need to check if that version is API 33, then it returns true. That means like we don't need to worry about the extensions if they are available or not. But if not, they are checking if the version is R, then extensions greater than 2 are available or not, because PhotoPicker is available since SDK extensions version 2. So we just need to call this built-in method, and if it returns true, that means there is a photo picker available for us. Then the contract that I have created earlier, we just need to launch that one by passing the request. In this case, it takes the visual media request, which takes a parameter, which is like what do you want. For by default it's images only, like sorry, it's images and video both. So your user can select images as well as videos. But if you just want to restrict that, you can pass like a image only or like a videos only. If you see the commented code here, And if you want both, you can just you can see a couple of options here: images, videos, these three options. So I'm just using image only for the demo purposes. So you just launch that one, and then on the result, I'm using the library from the coil. I'm using the composable called async image, which helps to load the result from the URI that I have consumed in the activity contracts result, which is stored in this one, and then it's just show the image. So this is basically if you are using the activity result contracts. But if you are not using, here is the sum of the like the code, which is like if the photo picker is available or not. You need to actually write down the boilerplate code by yourself. You are checking the version code of the SDK, then you are checking if the SDK version is R and SDK extension versions are is available or not. And this repository is publicly available on my GitHub. You can check like how much boilerplate code helps. We can avoid using the built-in contracts. So this is the command that we can use to actually check the SDK extension versions running on the device. So if you see here in the demo side, I'm using it's not the emulator, it's the actual device. So if I'm using that one and I want to check the output is already there, but I can just run the command again to show you guys. So we run this command and you can see that the output will be look like this. It says like the extension versions are and the number which is like 4 available on this device. So this is actually Android 11. This device is running, but because of the extensions, I can use PhotoPicker on this device. So I can quickly show you how it works, like selecting images, or like in our case, I'm just selecting one image. So this is the button which launches the photo picker. So this is good to go because Android 11 extension versions 4. So we can use it. So as I pass only the image only that I want only images, or user can select. So when I use select the image, I just show that image in the app. So the next thing I can quickly show you about like to installing SDK tools, because there are now lot of options that you can see when you go to actually install the tools for started integrating extensions in your applications. So this is the new UI. So you go under settings, then you go to SDK manager, then you go to the platforms here, and if you see here like here like there are a couple of options like Android 13 but without any extension versions available. But when you want to install the extensions along with it, you can see the options available for that particular version. So it says like Android 13 extensions 4, then there is Android 13 extensions 5, which is like the latest one, and you can just look for whichever is required. In our case is required like extensions version 2, so I installed 4 and 5 I guess yesterday, and you just install it and then you start using them for your for integrating different kind of functionality related to the extensions that they provided. So yeah, that's all from my side. Let me check if we missed something. No. So yeah, so here are a couple of the references for the if you want to learn more about like how module system works and what is the project Treble, project Mainline, and how it helps to actually achieve delivering modules to the older APIs rather than just having them specifically for newer versions. And thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to add in the comments. I will check in there.
That was a great presentation. Of thanks for
Okay.
sharing all this with us. I had heard about Project Treble and Marble when it had initially come out, and nothing more after that. But like with this, we get to see it in action, so that's awesome. And thanks for sharing.
Nice.
Uh, we don't have any questions right now, but people watching, if you have any questions, please post them. We'll just wait for a minute, and then I think we can continue.
Cool.
Okay, we don't seem to have any questions, so thank you so
Okay.
much now.
Thanks. Thank you.